Let's take a look at the two types of fiscal policy that the government can pursue in order to influence the economy. They can be expansionary in nature, or they can be contractionary in nature. And under each one of these types of fiscal policies, there are going to be three different tools that the government has at its disposal in order to influence the business cycle. So let's go ahead and break down each one of these piece by piece. So expansionary fiscal policy, like the name implies, the government is trying to stimulate or expand the economy. So here, expansionary fiscal policy. Expansionary fiscal policy. So expansionary fiscal policy, or fiscal policy just in general, has three main tools. Number one, they can increase government spending. Increasing government spending, we already know this. Government spending. They can do something with taxes. They can, of course, start to decrease taxes. We know this already as well. So decreasing taxes. And then finally here, the last tool that the government has at its disposal are going to be something known as transfer payments. So here they can start to increasing transfer payments. Increasing transfer payments. So what exactly are transfer payments? Transfer payments are just money that the government gives to people. So money that the government gives to people. Gives to people. And just in general, we're going to go ahead and say that transfer payments can be seen as welfare. So welfare in general. So three tools that the government has at its disposal in order to conduct any type of fiscal policy. We have government spending. If we're talking about expansionary fiscal policy, they want to increase government spending. They want to start to decrease taxes, or they can increase transfer payments, which we just learned were just monies that the government gives to people, or welfare in general. And expansionary fiscal policy, once again, is going to be a very, very powerful tool to help pushing out the economy or influencing the economy and where it may be headed. So take a look at this particular example where we have aggregate demand, where we have short-run aggregate supply, SRAS, and we have long-run aggregate supply, LRAS. So here we have our typical analysis of supply and demand, and we are currently operating at point A. At point A, as we already know, we are in some type of recession. We're at Q1 compared to Q star levels of GDP, and we're at PL0. So at point A, we'd like something to happen within the economy to get us out of this particular recession. And the government, if it does care more about us getting out of the recession, they're going to go ahead and pursue some type of expansionary fiscal policy. They can say, hey, let's go ahead and increase government spending. We can say, hey, let's go ahead and decrease taxes. Or they can say, hey, increase transfer payments to the citizens. And all of these have the same impact of moving the aggregate demand curve away from the origin. We go to AD1 and we end up at point B, where we're back to our full employment level of GDP, albeit with higher prices. So here, very effective tool for getting us out of the recession. So anytime we talk about expansionary fiscal policy, this is all going to increase aggregate demand, shift it over to the right, away from the origin. What happens if the government decides to pursue even more expansionary fiscal policy beyond point B? Well, we already talked about this. Remember that this is our long-run equilibrium, and it's perfectly fine for us to have short-run equilibrium above our Q star level. But remember that in the long run, we are going to adjust our expectations, and it's only going to be leading to demand pull inflation. So here, we're at point E. If the government decides to spend more money, we can end up at point A in the short run with higher GDP, higher price levels. But remember that we as consumers, we're going to adjust our expectations, ask for higher wages, and that's going to shift our SRES curve over to the left, and we're left at point B with higher prices, but the same amount of full employment GDP. So essentially, as we suggested in the previous chapter, this is one of the primary reasons why the government cannot keep on spending in order to induce higher levels of GDP, because it's only going to be a short-run effect, and as we adjust our expectations and transition over to the long run, it's only going to lead to inflation. So something to keep in the back of your mind. So essentially what we have right here, anytime aggregate demand increases, that's going to be expansionary fiscal policy. But of course, the economy, the government doesn't always have to expand the economy. They may want to contract it as well. And that's where we go ahead and take a look at contractionary fiscal policy. So contractionary fiscal policy. With contractionary fiscal policy, like the name implies, once again, we want to slow down the economy or contract it. And we're just going to take the same three tools and move everything to the opposite side. So what three tools, what direction do they go? If they want to pursue, if the government wants to pursue contractionary fiscal policy, they can decrease. So decreasing government spending. Decreasing government spending. Tool number one. Tool number two is to go ahead and increase taxes. Increasing taxes. And tool number three is, of course, to go ahead and decrease transfer payments, or decreasing transfer payments. Transfer payments. So less spending, less welfare, and higher taxes. All of these are going to do what to our aggregate demand curve? This is going to cause aggregate demand to go down. So decrease towards the origin. And why would the government ever want to pursue some type of contractionary fiscal policy? Well, that's where they want to go ahead and prevent the demand pull inflation from actually happening. So we want to stop inflation in its tracks. So here, in order to prevent an inflationary spiral. Inflationary spiral. So if the government ever wants to keep inflation in check, that's exactly where they want to go ahead and pursue some type of contractionary fiscal policy. So if the government starts to see the beginnings of demand pull inflation, like we are at point E right here, then the government may want to go ahead and say, okay, let's slow down the economy. Let's raise taxes. Let's decrease our spending just for a little bit, or decrease transfer payments. That's going to shift our aggregate demand curve over to the left, and we're going to be back to our long-run equilibrium at QF, Q star level of employment, and we're going to be left with lower prices. So here, if they just want to step in, usurp the demand pull inflation that may be happening, if they don't do anything at all, then that's exactly where they would want to pursue some type of contractionary fiscal policy. So three tools that we took a look at for the government to conduct any type of fiscal policy. They can change government spending, they can change taxes, or they can change transfer payments. And all three of these tools have the direct impact of affecting our aggregate demand curve. So something to be aware about that. However, there are some types of fiscal policies that the government can pursue that aren't going to affect the aggregate demand curve, but they may affect some portion of our supply curves, most notably our long-run aggregate supply. So this is where we're going to sort of go ahead and take a look at supply-side fiscal policies, which are going to sort of get rid of this trade-off between price levels and output, also known as Reaganomics, because he's the president that sort of came up with the sort of economic policies. But these supply-side fiscal policies are going to be affecting the long-run aggregate supply curve rather than the aggregate demand curve. So we want to take a closer look at that and be aware of the differentiation between these fiscal policies. We'll go ahead and take a closer look at those type of methodologies and channels in the next lecture.